Hey, thanks for joining. This is Conversations with Definitive Insight. I'm Jeff Davis, partner and principal consultant at Definitive Insight, and the host of this series of one on one discussions with real people with real world experiences and applying deep analysis and data to their work. The focus of the series has two parts. One, to bring you, the audience, discussions on the art and science of using data and measurement as a leader and as a professional. And two, to also share deeply as real people about our experiences with leadership and personal growth that help us work better with others and to care for ourselves along that professional journey. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Rocco Panciera, a friend and a previous client of mine when I supported some of his programmatic funding work with UNICEF and the UN on COVID-19 relief strategies, in particular focused on geospatial technologies and digital mapping systems. He is also a bold leader in fashionable eyewear that I tend to trend after as well. So welcome to the show, Rocco.
Thank you. Thank you, Jeff, for having me. Great to be here.
Yeah, thanks for being a part of this journey with me too on episode number 2. Let me tell you a little bit about Rocco. Dr. Panciera is currently leading UNICEF global portfolio on the use of geospatial data and technologies for health programs. An environmental engineer with specialization in hydrology and remote sensing by training, Rocco has nearly 20 years of experience in management, technical support, and capacity building of geospatial projects, including field data collection, acquisition, and management of spatial databases, advanced spatial analysis, and visualization of geospatial products and training. His career spanned diverse geospatial applications, from the development of algorithms for analysis of remote sensing with NASA and ESA satellite missions to the delivery of GIS training at the front line of healthcare systems in the poorest and most remote areas of the world. In the last decade, his leadership and experience has driven UNICEF to address critical challenges related to data-informed decision-making using state-of-the-art geospatial tech and delivering them at the lowest geographical levels, including health facilities and, communities, even migrant ones that he has to sort of chase around with some of that mapping. By combining various sources of geospatial data tools and methods, Rocco's work really enables the precise population distribution estimates, measuring accessibility by those populations to healthcare services, and optimizing that last mile of delivery for vaccines and other primary healthcare services, which allows them to reach those most vulnerable and left behind. Rocco's career, and he shared with me a lot too, is largely driven by that recognition that success in this venue of geospatial systems really hinges both on the people in the process as much as it does on the data analytics and tools. And so he shared a lot with me about his journey, and I'm hoping that he'll share some with you as well. And man, what an impressive background, my friend. How did you get interested in data stats and being a bit of a math wonk when you were, early college, even, or even
early
before?
on? Yeah, I think since I can remember, I used to come back home and do my homework, without any prompt and inputs from my parents. Like I was always particularly attracted to methodical kind of thinking. Earlier on, it was not very mathematical, but then at some point throughout secondary school, I started getting passionate about math and physics in particular. Started getting interested in astronomy, spending evenings now looking at stars and wondering at the universe. And that was really my entry point into continuing on that career path. But really, what in the early years, what really drove my decisions was places where I wanted to go. Like I had the opportunity to do a master in Australia. Having lived in Italy all my life, which I took because it was a hydrological project. It was interesting, but mostly it was going to take me furthest away from home that I had ever been, on completely the other side of the planet. And we're talking about early 2000. So, literally, using Alta Vista to look up images of Australia before deciding whether to go or not. Ended up there, and the work was super exciting. It turned out to be a combination of satellite-based remote sensing and hydrology, using data from a satellite-based system that detects environmental variables like soil moisture and vegetation cover, and plugging that into land surface models to do all sorts of predictions from agricultural growth, yield, to flooding, to climate change. So that was really exciting. It really exposed me through my PhD and 5 years of postdoc, in which I was actually, I had a very exciting title. I was a super science fellow. There was this super science fellowship from the Australian government, and it was always very funny to go around and say, and I'm a super scientist. I had the opportunity to travel to the US, work with NASA, and see real world application, of satellite imagery, and get into the really nitty gritty of the algorithms behind it. I always loved coding. Still today, coding is probably my comfort zone. I love the process, the mental process, although I don't do it that much anymore. But then, after 5 years of doing this very, very technical work, which ultimately even resulted in the algorithm that we had developed being applied to things that went to space eventually. The SMOS mission, the soil moisture and ocean salinity mission. I worked on the algorithm development for the data processing, and also the SMAP mission, the NASA soil moisture active passing mission. They're both in orbit now. And but after 5-7 years of I felt that I was a little bit my expertise had extremely narrowed down to I remember thinking, I don't want to hear the word soil moisture anymore, because it's like all my projects, everything, it's always that you start feeling a little bit that very, very deep science at times. It's hard to step back and look at it objectively. You're convince yourself more and more of certain things. You keep building your understanding and knowledge based on things that you want to be true, in a way. And so I started becoming a little bit unsatisfied. And around 2012, 13, after 5 years of postdoc, I decided that I had to do something else. It was really not a choice. I started feeling like I cannot go ahead and do this anymore. Waking up in the morning, just dragging yourself to work, feeling, why am I still doing this? And it took me some time to really figure out what else I could do out there in the big world, because a PhD is it brings you. PhD plus postdoctorate studies bring you to the very top of your field, but in a very narrow area. So it was really difficult. The process, it took me about 2-3 years to figure out what transferable skills I had that could work. And particularly, I was very interested in the developing world. My sense of social justice that started developing. I wanted to work with people more than with soil moisture. And so the opportunity came to go to Bangladesh in 2014 as a volunteer for international development, which is a program by the Australian government that essentially gives you a tiny little bit of salary it's generally for younger people than I was, for upcoming talent that wants to spend some time doing good. I was more like mid career in a way, or intermediate to mid career. So I went from big salary to minimum barely anything. You couldn't survive on it in the Western world, but it was enough to live in Bangladesh. But I kind of knew, and it was a big jump, you essentially cutting all my ties to the academic environment as far as I could tell at the time. Professors telling me why are you breaking it, cutting it at this point. But I knew instinctively that it was going to lead me to something good. And I loved it. I worked in Bangladesh doing GIS, Geographic Information System, for mapping healthcare system in slums, mapping extent of slums, and identifying optimal location of service delivery points to deliver maternal health care and child health care to the most disadvantaged. And after only 2 years of that, it allowed me essentially to fulfill the requirements for this position in UNICEF headquarters. So it was a big jump, and that's essentially giving up a little bit and taking that chance to go as a volunteer for 2 years allowed me to get a job that before would have never been possible. And on top of that, in Bangladesh, I then met my future wife, which kind of adds to the to the story. Yeah.
I love the part that you when you were moving away from one career to the other, and sort of the people you were currently with are like, are you sure you really want to do this? And you followed your gut. And I don't know how you felt it, but I felt too that when I talk about change like that in my career in the past, and I get that advice, I'm exposing their fear a little bit too. Like, they've committed for a long time, and even me making a change sort of makes them look at themselves a little. How did you feel through all that stuff? Like, that was a really cool moment to share.
Yeah, probably. This was in particular my mentor, a person that my PhD supervisor that has, in a way, formed a lot of my core help me approach science in a very methodical way, and I'm really thankful for him to that. But he was at a personal level a widely different person that I am, very conservative. And he was a creationist of all things. He was a scientist who was a creationist, which is kind of strange to believe how that is possible. But he was very, very conservative on set on a path. I'm going to do a PhD. I'm going to be a professor. Then I'm going to be a dean of the university. Everything was laid out. So it was really hard for him to understand my zigzagging around life. So yeah, it definitely was something that he could not understand. And today I'm surprised that I took that chance, because I'm not the most confident when it comes to the professional environment. I tend to second guess myself enormously, so I'm looking back. I think that decision was driven mostly by, I don't want to say desperation, but it was kind of like that. I could not look at my work anymore. I was feeling extremely out of place, and so it required, a very bold decision. And it's incredible how it resulted then into an enormous opportunity. Where I am now, it was unthinkable for me in 2014, because I did not have the experience, the skills. I probably had the skills, technical skills. I just don't have the experience that UNICEF required, somebody that had worked in developing countries before. So yeah, it was, looking back at it, was really quite a good choice from all points of view.
Yeah, I like that. Well, and also being willing to set aside a place where you'd become the master of some domain and saying, well, that's cool. I'm always going to hold on to that. But now I want to go expand and see. You used the thing transferable skills when you were talking through it. I talk about that a lot with direct reports that I've worked with or supported in the past, especially when we'll get to this topic later, when they get the imposter syndrome feeling. And I'm like, no, you're very capable, and that methodical mind and your level of commitment to get through a PhD and 5 years of postdoc, that's great energy to carry you forward into a lot of different things, just depending on where you're going to go with it, right?
Yeah, I'm always.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry. I was just wanted to touch a little bit on the PhD because it's it's a huge life commitment, and it's a commitment that causes a lot of both financial problems to people. It causes years of and even personal problems. Like I had health problems associated to the stress and the intensity of having to finish my PhD so that I wouldn't have my visa revoked. And it sometimes you look back and it makes you wonder how much was that, what has that given me, and what has that taken from me. And I think the most interesting thing about PhD, because it's rare that PhD that come out with real good science, right? Because as you're doing a PhD, you're learning how to do science. So generally, you finish your PhD and you're thinking, okay, now I wish I could do it all over again because now the outcome would be much better. Or at least that was my experience. But it really demonstrates, I think, what it does. It demonstrates your ability to single-mindedly be disciplined and focused on a task for multiple year and going very deep and not lose track of lose yourself personally and have that discipline to manage yourself on a personal level. I have this amazing stories of PhD students in my department back in Melbourne, which would disappear. Like they every once in a while they would have to do a census of the people that was still in the cubicles because there's people that got so lost because of supervisors not doing their job or it's bad supervisor, and people just has family problems and they just don't get to the end of it. And there's plenty of people that have lost their way during PhD programs.
Oh yeah, like so just because of the sheer length of it and the commitment that comes afterwards. And it's got to be intimidating too. I had a friend tell me, I don't have a PhD myself, so this is anecdotal, but a friend of mine told me how strange it was to them when they got done presenting their thesis and they went through the board, and then everybody stood up and congratulated them and said, "Hey, you're now the leading expert on blah." And they were like, "I'm the what?" You know? And it was sort of to go from study to be declared is also probably an interesting feeling.
It is, and it's also good to be called. It's also kind of fun to be called doctor. And I remember the first time I went to the airport and somebody looked at my and it's a bit weird because there's different ways of put it's in Australia you don't put it in front of your name. In the US it has different meanings. There's different social kind of uh, etiquette about it, so you never know how to deal with it. But for example, when I went to Bangladesh, I in Australia nobody says they're a doctor or they don't put it in their signature, right? Because maybe because there's many of them and it's a bit it looks a little bit you're just showing off a little bit. But then when I got to Bangladesh, I realized that soon that I was getting much more responses to my emails and from the local scientists and from the local chiefs of the various research units when I started putting PhD at the end of it, right? So that was kind of an interesting cultural difference.
Well, and if that doesn't work, you can remind them that you're a super scientist.
That's right. But then the opposite problem occurred when I came to work in the U.S. and I had all my signature on my email I forgot, and I left it as doctor, PhD, MP, whatever. And then here it looked a little bit lame. Nobody. It's rare that people put it. So yeah, that's interesting differences.
Oh yeah, yeah. I think you should add Esquire at some point to the end there. That was always one of my favorite.
That's funny. Yeah.
Um, that was thanks for telling us that story of the journey and sharing some of the personal moments in there too, Rocco. That part of it really helps, I think, our audience sort of like see themselves in it, and maybe too what's in front of them for some people who are just finding their way through it. Let's switch feet and talk a little bit about changing minds with data. I was hoping that you'd share a story with us about a time that you convinced someone to, change a strategy or basically shift their mind by presenting an insight or a little piece of data forward that really kind of changed the game for them or even for yourself.
Yeah, I'm thinking about what the best case would be, and I feel very much like going to my recent, my most recent kind of line of work and interest, which is working with deployment of geospatial data and tools at the front line of the health systems. And we for UNICEF, I travel frequently and work with um, countries and GIS consultants and GIS personnel in countries that UNICEF serves that are supporting the application of geographic information systems for the microplanning of health service delivery. Just a quick background: microplanning of health service delivery is the process by which uh, very local level data on the various communities and villages that are served by a specific health facility are mapped, cataloged, their population enumerated, the characteristic of the population enumerated, with the objective of deciding what resources will be needed to reach those communities, how much fuel will be needed, whether they can go with a bike or with a motorbike, what ultimately the vaccination coverage is in those areas, how many children are vaccinated in each community, why there are children that are not, why there are certain communities that are not vaccinated enough, and what can be done in terms of more resources to ensure that no children are left behind, which is the kind of final objective. We're trying to vaccination coverage globally is increased significantly in the past 40 years because of a global commitment by WHO and UNICEF to providing basic vaccinations in the first year of birth. And that has really increased our coverage of this basic vaccination. And I'm talking about measles, rubella, polio, things like that, up to 80-90% globally. In some countries, clearly still much less than that. But what we're really trying to do is do the last, reach the last 10-20% that are still there. They are in remote areas. They are in religious communities that do not want to vaccinate. And so there's a big effort to essentially do that last, find that last 10%. What is interesting of the way we're doing it is that we are delivering geospatial data in situations, and geospatial maps, in situations where the level of spatial thinking is extremely limited. It's an interesting experience because for people in the Western world, we are, even people that is not GIS experts, they have easy access to mapping products, Google Maps, things like that. They do, even without being understanding GIS, they are used to think spatially in terms of conceptualized space, lines, polygons, boundaries. There's a boundary in between your county and the next county. There's a boundary, well-defined boundaries of your country. And in these countries, and especially in remote areas, you realize that the level of spatial thinking at times is extremely underdeveloped. People is not necessarily used to see things from above or to think about things from above. And so when we deliver this kind of information, we encounter barriers that we didn't even expect would be there. For example, recently in Chad, we had a lengthy discussion with a local health manager, because what we're trying to do is delineate clear spatial boundaries of the what we call health facility catchment areas, which are the areas around a health facility where people get services from that health facility. And this is very crucial, because to understand this and know what those boundaries are, because you need to know how many people are within that health catchment area, so that you know how many doses of vaccines you need to deliver to the health facility, and so on. But it's always a difficult discussion because of this issue that even the concept of boundaries for locals are, they don't necessarily see and understand why there should be an abstract kind of line that defines what remember this person telling me, why are you constantly talking about boundaries? The health facility catchment areas are immaterial. They do not exist. We know the local villages know where the village starts and ends, and the local health facility manager know which settlements are part of the health facility. And that is, we understand that. The problem is that works well when all you have to do is walk to the next village to deliver a message or something. But when you're trying to optimize a health system, when you're trying to account for people and account for doses that are lost, you cannot rely on just the knowledge of the only health personnel at the last mile that knows what the area is. You need to have a level of accountability that is based on those geospatial boundaries, so that you can report that back. And again, you can use that for analysis and so on. So, geospatial data allows a level of flexibility, of interoperability of this kind of information with other things. For example, if I also want to do an analysis of the environmental risks that particular area is under, I take data from completely different sources, which is like maybe the medium temperature from space satellites to determine hotspots of malaria, mosquito malaria breeding. In order to relate this other completely different sort of data to their health facility, I need those boundaries, because I need to be able to do that spatial analysis. So it's a very important, and we always really bang our head against the walls, spending hours and hours to try to understand their perspective and to try to get them to understand also our perspective. And finally, we come, like in this case in Chad, we finally came to an agreement, to an understanding. They understood what exactly we needed, which was we really need to see what all the villages that are served by these health facilities are. But we also kind of acknowledged that there might be some fuzziness in that specific geographic line and where that sits. This is really, I'm getting really passionate about this, and that's why I've actually traveled a lot this year. I've been to Malawi, I've been to Chad, I'm off to South Sudan in 2 years, and in all three countries I'm doing the same. Yeah. I'm going out in the field and looking at this issue of boundaries. The objective is to then report that back globally and try to build some guidance or some recommendations about how we can deal with this in the best way that is more at the same time gives us the data that are needed, but also respects and is sensitive to how things are organized on the ground. There was an interesting case recently of a community, a village that is a fisherman village on the edge of Lake Malawi, and it was very far away from the health facilities that they go to for services, like 24 kilometers. And they do have, we're looking at the maps, we do realize that there is a health facility nearer to them. So we're wondering with the health facility manager, why are we vaccinating this village from here instead of from there?
Yep.
And they said, well, we tried, but the local village leaders, because historically they were associated to the health facility, they refuse to. They feel like they belong to that area, and this is a very, very local, cultural, political kind of issue. So as we do optimization and use GIS to improve the health system, we also need to deal with this local level, cultural, political issues. Which means that even if you give amazing maps, the best maps, fantastic maps with advanced geospatial products, they could just be largely ignored because it's something that comes a little bit from above. So it needs to be, very carefully integrated into their knowledge, the local knowledge and the local processes of people.
Well, yeah, and I mean, to a certain extent, it sounds like you're putting the professor hat back on a little bit there too, in both understanding their context, but helping them understand like why this data helps us with boundaries, convince people to bring funding in because we're saying this catchment area needs your attention, and so it's like it's a good mix of having to bring them along and respect their sort of boundaries, both religious or local political.
That's right.
I always found it too really interesting, and you've talked to me about this work in the past as well, of Western cultures aren't necessarily used to talking about more nomadic populations or populations that constantly move. So even though there's city centers, you have to get real creative with mapping sometimes in order to see like where a population moves around and will be when the next vaccination set comes along. Would you mind maybe sharing just a tiny bit about that too, just so people can get some color on that?
This is an open problem that we're addressing. We're trying to figure out how to address. I think population mapping, the spatial population mapping, has done huge leaps in the last 10 years through machine learning and AI algorithms working on satellite images. There's a number of products out there that has brought our mapping of population worldwide down to 100 meters resolution by triangulating, all sorts of spatial data. However, these are still static products. The issue of dynamic population is a little bit harder. How do you say, not to crack? Mm-hmm. Because it requires, while the static product can be highly depersonalized and and come from anonymized data sources, tracking people movements goes easily into the issue of privacy, even when you try to do it in an aggregated way. Some of the things that have been tried or have been partially successful is called data records, where we, and I'm saying not we, not UNICEF in particular, there's other big organizations that are doing it, are essentially getting data of mobile phones and tracking people. You can do it in the anonymized way. So you don't actually have access to the individual data, you just have access to the aggregated movement. So that's been partially successful, and it's done regularly for humanitarian response. I'm more in the business of bringing things into the routine health system, and that step it's still it hasn't been still fully realized. in tracking both migratory movements, internal displaced people from other countries coming in. It's difficult because not only the pure information of knowing that 100 people have moved from, say, one area to the other, it's not enough from a health system perspective, because we have individual patients' records, and so it tells you something, it gives you some information, but then the problem is that you need to tag people individually through health immunization child registries. People needs to be registered, and in many countries, people, we're working on even civil registration. Children don't get necessarily registered at birth. So there's a lot of children out there that are on nobody's record. It's difficult to reach them precisely, let's say. But we're working a little bit on the movements, on population movements, but it's a big research. I would say still at the level of research than actual operational implementation. I work a lot UNICEF is a structure where you have people that works on the advanced tech, kind of sandboxing applications, if that term makes sense, before putting them out there. Like, we cannot risk, we're very careful about putting technologies out there that will impact millions of people before we have figured out what the pros and cons are of this technology. Most recently, we worked on a UNICEF AI strategy, and I was a big promoter of, I'm sitting frequently in meetings with people is like, all this AI, why don't we just go with it? And, I'm more of the idea that we need to, as we think about how to implement it, because our users are kids in slums or teenagers in the middle of nowhere, we need to be very careful, for example, about introducing AI in chatbots for mental health. It needs a level of check that maybe you don't need when you're just deploying an AI system for WhatsApp images or something like that.
I mean,
I ended up talking about that.
Oh, no, this is great. Actually, I love that you trailed into that topic a little bit, and because AI is coming up a lot in my work as well, or I, gave some recent career advice to somebody getting into data analytics, and I spoke about this too, is the AI, the machine is really great at looking at massive amounts of data and letting you throw all sorts of correlation analysis at it that you couldn't do by hand or by yourself. But the humans are still very important to make sense of that stuff, because one of my favorites is was it in 2016, there was a 0.98 R² correlation value between the import of lemons and the number of motor vehicle deaths in the state of California. And the machine won't necessarily know that the import of lemons and the number of deaths aren't related without somebody being there. Now, you can teach it about probability maybe over time and sort of weight things. We could argue against that method, but it's a good example of why the humans are still there, and frankly are hopefully doing some of the bigger thinking, funner stuff over time.
Yeah, and even more so important depending on who your end users are, and how vulnerable they are.
Yeah. How are they knowledgeable enough to understand even what it means to say there's correlation? That doesn't mean causality, which is, I still feel like I talk to executives at all sorts of companies about that regularly.
Yeah, statistics is a wild it's a wild area, right? You can say a lot, and it's hard. It's this even, and I know a little bit about statistics, and I need to rely on other people knowledge, but sometimes it's easy to draw conclusions in a very statistically sound way.
Yeah, exactly. Or I've spent 2 weeks at work writing a white paper explaining to executives why big data isn't going to solve all their answers. Like, here's the opportunities it probably avails to us given our context. But like, because Google came out and said they could have predicted the last malarial outbreak, before it happened, I'm like, there's a lot behind that sentence when they said that we need to talk about.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing the stories there and the walkthroughs, because I think too, there's a lot of our audience that's not used to thinking like we said earlier. If you say, what's the population of Atlanta? Somebody will say a number, but if you were talking about in chat or something, you're like, well, and this area surrounding them that associates themselves with it, and so on and so forth. Like, maybe in the US context, we'd say, I'm in greater Atlanta, if you wanted to label something like that. But it's a very different conversation than some of the things that you're tackling.
Yeah, I was going back to Chad. There was this very interesting. I was talking with the locals about, Chad is a huge country, and the northern part sits in the Sahara, essentially in the Sahara Desert, and there's a border with Libya, and they were talking about the very incursions of Libyans and that they get from various area and from people that is coming in from now from Sudan. And the northern, if you look at the northern border of Chad and Libya, is like 500 kilometers of a straight line, like a perfectly straight line in the middle of the Sahara Desert. And the guy at the ministry was telling me that border essentially does not exist. Like it's an imaginary line. There's nothing there, and there's no. So it was a good representation of this concept of the intangibility of borders in certain situations.
I like it. Well, you ready to switch feet over to talking about the big topic?
Yeah. What is the big topic?
The big topic at hand today for us is talking about imposter syndrome.
Okay.
So
Okay.
it's a conversation piece that's been, I think, in the last couple of years, highlighted more and more as people are trying to be honest about where they are and how they're feeling at work, rather than sort of like hide those concerns, maybe with something of the past. But it's nice to have that topic come to the forefront a lot more.
Wow.
Psychology today says, imposter syndrome is associated with our social fears and our biases and how we interpret success and failure. It's related to our mental health and a lot of our own personality factors and how we see things. I've been joking a lot lately that the people with the most knowledge and education tend to have the most doubts, and the people with the least tend to have the least. And that also causes a problem with very wise, thoughtful people thinking that they shouldn't be in the room, when in fact, they're probably, at least relatively speaking, the right person to be there. What does imposter syndrome mean to you, and how have you felt it in the past, especially on that career journey that you've shared with us so far?
I would say that for me, it only became relevant once I came out of my scientific academic comfort zone, and find myself all of a sudden in New York, UN headquarters. Yeah, all of a sudden it was very big. Everything was very big. A lot of responsibilities, a lot of visibility globally on what you do. And I think in my case, the way I understand imposter syndrome, to be honest, as you were saying, I understand it now as something that it seems to be a very core psychological kind of characteristic of nearly everyone, in just various degrees. For some people, it becomes a crippling factor. For some people, it's just maybe a tiny little voice in their head that maybe gives them a little bit of doubt, but they manage to override it very easily. In my case, I don't know to what extent I would say in my case, it's been mixed a little bit with a bit of anxiety due to doing this kind of work. So I'm not sure how you can actually, the two things are probably very, in my case, coupled, imposter syndrome and anxiety. I mean, it would be interesting to see if somebody has imposter syndrome without being also having some sort of anxiety. It seems like they kind of go together. So it took me several years to get the handle of it, and I would say in my case it's been three main factors. I mean, originally my initial attempt was through meditation. um, I read a lot about Zen. Started doing meditation on a regular basis. Having a job that is highly, intense mentally. I really love the idea of emptying your mind and just feeling the moment and being in the present. So your typical power of now, various meditation techniques that really did something, helped me regain my sleep. But I would say that for me, at least, that only goes to a certain extent, that in a natural way. Then there was an element of recognizing that there's possible also chemical imbalances that you should also kind of be possibly open to discuss with professionals. Um, and all these things for me was a little bit for many years I resisted because I was thinking I had a very old school way of seeing medications are something that it's very, very extreme. But then something I opened up to, and I think it's an element that can really help many cases. And but also I think what now I think really helps me overcome that sensation of not why am I here? Why is people listening to me? Why do they think that I know? Uh, it came from convincing myself or realizing myself that everybody's feeling the same, and it happened frequently. For example, when I'm in meetings and I kind of study at but how do you say that body language or people, and I like to really check what their breathing patterns are, because you can tell when people is feeling uh, slightly out of place, right? Because their breathing is kind of short, or they're taking big breaths, and you can tell that from observing their upper chest. And that really sometimes helped me understand, oh, they're feeling exactly how I'm feeling. We're both here in this room faking, pretending that we know everything, but secretly scared that we're going to get fired, or that everybody's going to realize that we don't actually have the answers, or we don't know everything. And so that partially helped me a little bit to realize that, yeah, we're all feeling exactly like that. So why should that bother me?
Sure.
It's a little bit probably similar to the old trick that they used to tell me when about public speaking, or imagining that everybody's naked. A little bit similar with that. Imagine that everybody's wondering the same thing, and it's which is kind of funny because sometimes it makes you wonder: is there a different way for us to have meetings instead of all feeling? Because we know that there's a person behind. I mean, in some cases you can, but you can't in every meeting, especially in my line of work, put it at a personal level, because there's maybe 17 people in the room. There's people from the Ministry of Health. You need to maintain a certain level of image, of facade. But it makes you wonder sometimes how different things will be if we could really all understand who is behind that image of the health specialist, or the this and this and that.
Oh yeah. Yes. Yeah, and that last part resonates a lot with me, and the recognizing that everybody else is feeling the same way. And I love you're watching sort of the physical behaviors of the people around you to see when they're intense. It's almost like a check-in without embarrassing them. Like, I see you're having the same anxiety I'm having, you know? And yeah, and it's that anxiety that you mentioned earlier that really struck me too, because I feel like people who care about their professionalism, their own, and then also that of the people they're informing around them and working with, if they care deeply about that, that anxiety is pretty natural. Like there's a care that you want to carry forward, especially when you're purporting expertise, even when that expertise is like relative in the room. Like you're extremely, like relatively speaking, an expert on population mapping, but I bet there's rooms where you're like, I'm just a kid at the playground here, like all these other ones trying to figure it out together. And so sometimes too, that shifting of context and who you're with can change that feeling a little bit too. So I love that part about the anxiety. That helped a lot.
Yeah, there's definitely a different level. Yeah, there's every meeting is you are in a different dynamic, and in some cases you feel extremely confident, and in some cases it's really a little bit more difficult. Um, but yeah, I think yeah, in all situations, I think it helps actually a little bit. At the COVID, the pandemic is, I think, helped that a little bit because it has helped us break a little bit those barriers. Because we had to take calls from home, and we had to talk about our cat and our dog and the messiness of the room. I think it has changed a little bit in that sense. Maybe it would be good to learn a little bit from that, and whether a bit of personal touch. But I think we did. I think we don't even remember maybe how it was before. Things have changed a lot, and maybe we used to be a little bit more up stiff.
Yeah, I think let's see, since about 2016 or 17, I took a big group facilitation set of courses to kind of upskill there. And one of the things that they were talking about was how to witness, like you were saying you were doing naturally, how the room's going. And one of the things I like to do is try to start, I think people rush this, and that's unfortunate because everybody's like, oh, we have to get to the meeting and the decision making. But if you started with an icebreaker that's like, hey, everybody take a deep breath, think about what you're bringing into the room with you from the last meeting, from your life, from all those things. How are you? And let's just do a little round robin. And some people do, like, I think even you and I have done a couple of these where we put like emojis of how I'm doing today as we're sort of kicking off some of those larger discussions. And those little things can be powerful to help people put that out there.
Yeah, I was, I love the way things are done in Africa during official meetings. There's always somebody that, first of all, facilitators. If you're sitting, for example, with 50 government people in anywhere in Africa, that the almost there's always somebody that kind of they facilitates in a very energetic way, in a very trying to bring out a very communal sense. Are we all together? Yes. When we're discussing something, do we all agree that this strategy is the right strategy? And everybody has to go yes. And they always do this energizers where they do a little dance. Everybody stands up and they touch your feet, touch your head. It's very interesting. And there's always, or at least in some countries in Africa, the prayer before, at the beginning and at the end of each meeting. I'm not religious. I don't, let's say, consider myself a Catholic or anything. But I kind of enjoy those moments. I do close my eyes, and I don't put my hands together, but I do close my eyes and try to soak up the atmosphere. Despite not being religious, I think the act of praying jointly is kind of a beautiful thing, regardless of who you're doing it to. So I always enjoy it, and it always makes me laugh because it's prayers that are made on the spot, like let's hope that let us allow this GIS system to improve the way we deliver our duties. They always put in that. It's always very interesting.
I like that though. That's building context into it, right?
Yeah, there was actually a great quote from during one of these situations in Malawi where he was trying to explain then the importance of data for to this health facility manager. Some of them, that had walked for 2 hours to get to the district hospital or come with a bike and could, in some cases even barely write and read. And he said, "Look, what we need to think is that in God we all trust, but for everything else we need data."
Oh yeah, man, we could run with that one for a while.
I thought it was brilliant.
That's funny. I like it. Yeah, even though we trust, I like the trust but verify. It was kind of in the flavor of that one, right?
Yeah.
Well, dude, this has been such a great discussion. I really appreciate your vulnerability and sharing some of your career journey and even putting out there like, hey, at this step I had high anxiety and here's what I think about to get through that myself. Those kinds of things I think not enough people share. And so I really appreciate that you did that for me and for our audience today.
Thank you. I just love the personal insights, and it's always also very liberating.
Well, yeah, and you said it best. I wish there were times that we just talked about it more directly together. And so the more we practice it in front of others, I think the more we'll make the change in the universe we want to see.
That's right.
Bringing us to a close, is there anything that you're working on now that you're excited about or that you'd sort of share out?
No, I'm actually at a personal level. Tomorrow I am going skydiving for the first time in a long time, so I'm really looking forward to get back on that.
Yeah, buddy.
And you know how much I love that.
Well, yeah, and that's you're living my wingsuit dreams for me, so that I can just watch you doing it.
Wasn't it around the
200 jumps? Was it minimum?
200 jumps? Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm actually starting to wonder whether I might actually possibly be the only UN diplomat, skydiving UN diplomat. I should check that.
Well, then the last thing I'll ask for is you got to remember to send me the link to your place where you get your eyewear because your glasses are like on point today, my friend.
I will do.
So, well, thank you for your time. And
thank you.
This is a close up of the episode here with Definitive Insights. So hope you all enjoyed and write some comments and hopefully you're following along.